Alright, so in the previous video, I went through the common iteration methods for arrays and their polyfills. There's one more native array method polyfill that interviews normally go for, and that's the flat or the flatten method. The core idea is to flatten an array of nested items. So consider this array that you see on the screen, for example. There are a few numbers in here at the root level. So these numbers that you can see, you can consider them to be on the root level. Let's call this level 0. Then we have this array, this one right here. The numbers inside this array are at level 1. Finally, there's this deeply nested array, and these numbers can be considered to be on the level 2. The flat method optionally takes in the number of levels, or you can also call it the depth, as a parameter. If you don't pass in anything, the number of levels would default to 1. One level essentially means that any arrays inside this root array will dissolve their elements and add them to their parent array. So this level 1, 32, 43 and 88 will dissolve all of its elements, and they'll go to level 0 along with these elements. The level 2 will dissolve itself and go to level 1. If I pass in 2 though, the deeply nested array will also get completely dissolved to level 0. So all the elements inside this array will be on the same level. Hope this made sense. If I do not want to bother myself with the levels, then I can simply pass in infinity. And no matter how deeply nested array we have inside here, it will end up at level 0 at the end of the operation. So now that we are clear as to what this method does, let's build a polyfill for it. Since this is at the end of the day an array method polyfill, you'll see a few similarities again to the map, filter and reduce method polyfills. So please do watch the previous video which I have linked in the description, as I might quickly go over some fundamentals that were covered over there. So yeah, do watch that first. The first thing that we need to do is attach our custom method to the array prototype, just like we did for the previous methods, so that when you create an array the next time, you'll have this method inbuilt. So I'll attach our polyfill to this prototype, and it's going to be a function that takes in the level as a parameter. Inside this function, I'll create the result array, and at the bottom, I'll also return it. Now, if you think about how you'd want to make flattening work, the first thing that should come to your mind is to use recursion. That's because we go through an array index by index and try to flatten each element. If the element is not an array, we do not care. If it is an array though, we go inside the array and do the same thing that we did in the parent array. If there's any array inside this level 1 array, we again do the same thing. So the process of dissolving an array has to be done repeatedly and recursively. My first rule of thumb whenever I'm working with recursion is to move that logic out in a separate function. It makes things much simpler for me. So I'll be doing the same thing here. I'll create a function and I'll call it flatten. This function will take the array that needs to be flattened and the current level for that array. So when I go through level 0 and I come across the first array, we'll run this flatten function again on this new array, and the level will be 1. Inside this function, I'll run the for loop on the array, and for each iteration, all I need to do is check if the element is an array or not. If it's not an array, I can simply push that element to the result array directly. But if it is an array, we need to run the flatten function on it. I also need to check the level of the array. If it's deeper than the value that we provide to the flatten function at the top here, then we won't be moving forward. We push the array as it is. So let me create the for loop here. So I'm iterating through all the elements inside this array. When I come across an element that is of the type array, and the current level of that array is less than the level that we have provided, then we'll simply recursively run the flatten function. If that is not the case, if the element is not an array, then we'll directly push it to the result array. Now finally, we'll call the flatten function. So here we'll simply call the flatten function, and I'll pass in this, and I'll set the level as 0. So this is the root level. And as I had mentioned earlier, if you do not pass in anything in the native flat method, it still flattens the array by 1 level. So I also need to do the same here inside our polyfill. Let me pass in a default value to the parameter here at the top. So I'll set it to 1. So when we try to use this custom flatten polyfill and we do not pass in any argument to it, then it's simply going to default to 1. To get the current array on which this polyfill is going to run, I can simply use the this keyword. Now let's try to run this thing. So I have a bunch of examples here. The first one is where I pass in 0 as the level. So this example ideally should return the entire array as it is. It won't even go inside this for loop, so it's going to return the entire array back. The second one, where I do not pass in any parameter here, this should ideally flatten the array by one level. That's because we have set a default value here, so if I do not pass in anything, it's still going to flatten the array by one level. Then we have this example wherein we are explicitly passing in 1, so it should give me the same result as this custom flat instance. Then we have level 2, so it should ideally dissolve arrays that are 2 levels deep. And then finally we have infinity, so this is essentially going to dissolve the array completely and will only have one single level. So let me run this in the browser. Yeah, basically we can see that this flattened polyfill works. So yeah, that's how you'd write your own array flattened polyfill. See if you can come up with some edge cases and practice this by yourself to get a grip on how this works. I have a few more polyfill videos coming your way, so do subscribe for that. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one.